going to introduce our first speaker, which is David Loseby in the middle here. Now, David is Chief Behavioural Science Officer with Suppeco, which is a collaborative supplier relations platform. David has 30 years' experience at senior executive and director level, driving value and change in procurement, organisational transformation and change management. And he also has long academic experience as well, being a visiting scholar at the University of East Anglia and also a professor of research impact at Leeds University Business School. Our second panellist is Roger West, sitting on our left here, Director of Logistics at Defence Equipment and Support. Welcome, Roger. Now, Defence Equipment and Support procures equipment and services for the British Armed Forces. Roger has a long background in procurement and supply chain management in the private sector as well as the public, having also worked for IBM, Asda, and Coopers and Lybrand. And our third panellist is Dave Schultz. Welcome, Dave. And Dave is Chief Supply Chain Executive with Westfall Technik. And Westfall is a plastics manufacturing company. Dave describes himself as an imaginative deal maker who is passionate about building trusting relationships. And he has also managed several $1 billion of spend at a number of multinational companies, including GE and Boston Scientific. So, it's a strong panel, and there'll be a lot of insight. And what I think we'd like to start with, gentlemen, is digitalisation, supply chains. It almost feels like you can't say one word without the other. So, but I'd be interested to know, what does supply chain digitalisation mean to you personally and to your organisations? And Roger, maybe if we could start with you and just work our way across the panel.
Okay, well, it's clearly a very important part of what we're trying to do in defence. So as well as looking after logistics, I look after platform support across our various air, land, sea domains as well. And the fibre that runs across all of that is information, and we need to get much better at how we use information. Digitisation is the sexy part of what everyone's talking about. We have lots of conversations about needing to digitise our supply chains. Digital twins is another thing. But I think fundamentally for us, it is about looking at our processes and figuring out how do we tweak our processes and bring our people to bear on them such that we can be more effective but also more efficient in the way we use our resources, because being in the public sector, we are limited in what resources we have available to us, and we are stretched a bit at the moment, as you might imagine.
David?
Yeah, I likewise, in a sense, recognise what Roger said. But I think one of the things I went racing to sort of go grab before I came to the conference was as you'd expect probably from a part academic, is a definition of what exactly supply chain digitalisation is. So the definition that I most liked and came up with was the one that said, supply chain digitisation is when a business embraces digital technology to improve its processes and how it works both internally and with customers and suppliers. It takes human-driven events and uses digital technology to make them software-driven, which I thought was actually quite apt. And what sort of really struck me out of that was the thing that I've always sort of perhaps evangelised about is that you've got to get this marriage between technology and people truly balanced. And I think that for me is the real essence of it all. And I think the one thing that I always recognise is that many people who have not experienced this read digitalisation and immediately think it's some sort of IT type project, and it's got nothing to do with people. In fact, actually, the primary driver and the rationale and the benefits that come from supply chain digitalisation are in the ways in which you can get effective adoption. So that's the people piece to all of this. So for me, I think that's incredibly important, and I think the more we focus and emphasise that sort of people dimension to the digitalisation aspect, I think the more likely we're going to get bigger successes in that space. So Dave?
Sure, yeah. No, that was great. And I would just build on that. You know, we hadn't met until a few minutes before this,
Sure.
This conference, but I think my thoughts are right in line with what you're saying. A lot of people talk about, you know, AI and artificial intelligence and machine learning, but I think they forget about an item which I call HI, you know, and that's human intelligence. And I think that's the key that makes all this work. And as you mentioned, it's really not just about IT, it's about looking at the end-to-end supply chain and ensuring that you really have, you know, an innovative workforce that's capable of adopting digital. And that's really, the key thing. And unless you have it really built end-to-end, you can have some improvements in one side, but then it sort of it drops at another side. So in other words, you know, there's almost something that I would call digital waste. There's a lot of digital waste that happens where you may look at your master data and then you put in your lead times for all your suppliers and then you never update it, right? So you take the industry we're in, plastics, you know, in the last couple of years, suppliers have had customers on allocation. They've had 26, 28, 35-week lead times and so forth. And now it's completely changing. Certainly in the US, I'm talking mainly, it's completely changing to 6-week lead times, and their businesses are dropping dramatically. Prices are now dropping, and it's a whole different environment. And unless that, you know, information changes in the system, you know, you're really going to be developing a supply chain that's very, very inefficient. So I would just underscore what you had said, that it's really about the human interaction of it. There's discussions about autonomous procurement, you know, things like that. But I think it's more like the self-driving Tesla. You still want to have somebody in that driver's seat right now. Nobody's really comfortable with having nobody in the driver's seat. And I think that's the human intelligence that really needs to happen to make it all work.
So that's a very important point, I think, Dave. You know, the quality of your digitalisation is only as good as the quality of the data, isn't it? So
Yeah.
How do you ensure that what you're working with is useful data that is going to give you, you know, result in quality decision making? Maybe Roger, if you take that one.
Yeah, we've got 1.2 million NSNs, stock keeping units for those outside of defence. And each one of those NSNs has, I think, 140 different data points attached to it. So I can't do the maths on it, but it's a lot of data elements. Not all of them are as important as others, but maintaining that is very difficult. And, you know, you mentioned lead times, Dave. You know, I would worry significantly about the accuracy of some of our lead times in our systems and therefore what decisions our systems are making on reorders, for example. But I think in my mind, the way we need to deal with that is about how we share and use data across the supply chain. So, you know, our industry partners know their products much better than we do, and I would like to be tapping into their data resources and importing them into our organisation so that we can use that as a piece of data truth which will help in improving our decision-making effectiveness and the quality of our digitisation strategy. There's no point in digitising something which has got rubbish data in it.
No, absolutely not.
So, David, sorry.
No, I was going to say, I think the one thing that always strikes me is the fact that you've got what I call data dissonance and data gaps. So this is like the, you know, different information about really essentially the same thing, but it comes back to this fact that having that ownership and creating a collaborative way of engaging with the supply chain is going to make such a difference in terms of, and it's almost a bit of a paradigm shift, I think, in terms of giving more, I'll call it, credence and autonomy to the supply base in its totality, so that actually they're there then to take ownership of the data, because I think it's through that we will get better data sets, better information, and we'll arrive at better decision making as a consequence. So this sort of shift, I think, from it's our supply chain and it's our information and it's our contracts and all the rest of it, I think we've got to sort of almost let go of that and say we need to enter into a different sort of, I'll call it, phase of engagement, which is a very different sort of mindset and approach in terms of collaboration and engagement with the supply chain like perhaps we've never done before. And I think it's that sort of changing sort of almost the balance in that sort of set of scales where we've got this collaborative relationship that is going to make such a massive difference back to that sort of classic sort of one of the things that you see so often whereby you've got people saying, oh yes, I've got compliance in my supply chain. We might have compliance, but you don't have adoption. So it's that fundamental shift from, I've ticked and I've put my name in against those contracts and I've done that, but the real magic happens when you get people adopting the information, the data, and the collaboration that's necessary then to bring this to life. And I think that's the difference. And I think this is the sort of the phase that we're now entering, which is making that more a reality. And I think we can do that. But also, I think to sort of just look ahead for the next few years, and you look at the sort of the requirements in terms of legislation and reporting and compliance that we'll need in terms of ESG, sustainability, etc. To your point, Roger, we're just going to have more fields to fill in and required because we're going to need to do that both from a not just from a regulatory and reporting requirement, but from the fact that we need to know what the provenance and the risks are within our supply chain. Dual usage of technology, misappropriation of technology into the wrong purposes. So all those kind of things are going to become quite important. So I see almost a sort of this is almost the starting gate, and whereby we've got to sort of try to sort of bridge that sort of collaboration gap that I think we've got with the supply chain and move more towards this sort of more open architecture, as I'll call it, in terms of how we configure and enable our digitisation. But
Well, I think it is. We always think about the supply chain as moving physical product around.
Yeah.
And what we need to think about the supply chain is, yes, there's product move around, but there's a boatload of data that we need to move around as well. So not only in terms of us wanting to import things from the supplier's data set, but they want stuff from us in terms of usage information.
Yeah.
And we need to figure out how we're going to do that.
Yeah, I mean, data is an asset in its own right. So, and it's a saleable commodity. So we need to recognise that it's, to your point, it's not just that physical, part or component.
A key word there, I think, David, collaboration.
Yeah.
Something else we hear a lot of in supply chain, the need for it and the benefits of it. So I'd be interested to know, Dave, you're in manufacturing. What does collaboration look like, for your company and with your value chain?
Yeah, well, I think one of the foundations of collaboration in the supply chain has been the S&OP process. If people are familiar with, some people call it SIOP or Sales and Operations Planning, and it basically takes it all the way from the back end to the front end and making sure that you're satisfying your customer. And just back to the, the theme that we just spoke about, it's really about pulling back the curtain on the data. Right now, all the data does need to be shared, and it needs to learn, it needs to grow, and the systems need to get smarter. So, it's people take a look at things, and there's a lot of vision out there. You can't really read any articles without AI and ML and all that. And looking back at Amazon, back in 2014, I think they have a patent on, I think it's called anticipatory shipping. So where they actually ship the product before the customer even orders it. You might say, how does that happen, right? Well, the system is smart enough to know that you're probably going to reorder something. It ships it, it gets it in the system, doesn't have its final destination, until you order that, and then it diverts it sort of in that last mile, let's call it. And that was 2014, right? We're sitting here in 2022 now, still trying to figure out a lot of these kind of things. But I think we're moving a lot quicker now. I think there are solutions out there, that can, get you most of the way and so forth. But I'll go back to the earlier point you were making as well. I think it really works well in a startup type incubator environment. I mean, this is a innovative kind of approach to a lot of these things, and it's a change process with humans once again, and a lot of times there's resistance to change. So I think there's a big focus right now on making sure that there is efficiency in that on the manufacturing side, and making sure that you deliver the product. But actually, the bar has been raised basically about what we see in our, daily life with Amazon and Uber, and things like that. And I think it just, it's going to make everybody really move quicker, even on the manufacturing side as well.
I mean, Roger, things are presumably slightly different for you because of the nature of the business you work in, with security and data protection. How can data, collaboration on data take place in that kind of environment? How do you move forward with those sort of natural security restrictions?
Well, we have to deal with those anyway because, we're buying products which by their very nature are pretty secure. So we're used to those relationships working in a secure environment. We're used to sharing data in a secure environment. What we need to look at, I think, is the evolution of our contracting, particularly in the public sector and in the defence sector, where it does tend to be structured around the contract rather than in retail, which can be a lot looser, is making sure that the things in the contract are fit for purpose for where we're heading in the future. Because many of our products are very long, either very long lead time or very long lifetime. So we do need to make sure that we're buying things in a contractual environment, a commercial environment, which is going to be right for where we're trying to get to in the future. That includes things like availability of data, but we need to think about a bunch of other things about, particularly as technology becomes ever more complex in weapon systems and the integration onto different platforms. That responsibility for who does the systems integration can sometimes be a bit unclear. If you're putting a weapon system onto, a frigate or an aircraft carrier or a tank or something, someone has to own that integration responsibility, and you have to be quite clear about that. And we're not necessarily very used to doing that.
Thank you for that, Roger. Now, David, I know your area of deep expertise is behavioural science and how that relates to making quality decisions on the ground in a business context. Wondered if you could maybe share with the audience some ways in which the digital transformation process falls down because of the demands that it places on human beings at work. I mean, what does that look like when digital transformations fail? What kind of things are people experiencing? What are they saying? How are they behaving?
Wow, how long have you got? I could talk about that for hours, but I think the harsh reality is that most digital transformations, and this is over quite a number of years, and this goes back to a guy called Cotter, which is 30-odd years old. IT and digital transformations basically have about a 30 to 40% success rate, which, when you think about the fact that people build business cases on the basis of saying it's 100%, there's a bit of a shortfall there. Most people, even if you're not a mathematician, can work out that that's not probably a good return on your investment. And so, the things that normally we see is organisations set about it in terms of they simply assume that people will adopt the new technology. But oddly enough, in a sense, it's approached from the point of view of we're looking for compliance. But actually, what they don't consider then is, what's actually the motivation for somebody to do something different? What is their personal motivation? Why should they do this? And obviously, I could bore you to death with the behavioural science behind this for hours, sort of thing. But the reality is, we need to understand what the motivations are. Back to a point you made actually earlier, Dave, which is, what capabilities do we have in the organisation? Don't just assume that people have good levels of digital maturity. Actually, I've seen many instances, and I shan't say which companies or where or who, but even to the extent of understanding which web browser they're using, some people go, I don't understand what you're talking about. So we know that those sorts of issues are there in terms of capability, and then therefore what other things can we put in place that actually facilitate that journey for people in a non-confrontational way? So this is about what I call the frictionless journey, which is about removing the barriers to be able to actually use the technology, not see it as a threat. So the classic thing that most people don't talk about is, am I going to lose my job as a consequence of this? Actually, the reality, most digital transformations are about getting to the point whereby we can have good quality inputs, data, and connectivity around the things that we're trying to do. to free up people to do actually more value-adding things. So, you know, the whole ethos behind why we want to do a digital project is so important in terms of that sort of behavioural set. And I think the problem is that it's not approached from that. In fact, it's interesting, many programs that I've been called in, to sort of say, so how can we rescue this? In fact, I've been called into many instances where people have either gone, you know what, we've only got a 15% adoption rate, should we kill it? Or actually, we've already killed it and we bought a new piece of technology. There are too many instances of that because it's just been, I'll call it sort of, it's almost the foie gras sort of approach to technology, which is we're just going to ram it down your throat and that's it, take it, rather than an engagement piece, which is predicated around getting people motivated and excited about what they can do, how they can do it, how it will actually help them in their daily job, and is actually not something there that is a, how can I put it, an impediment to either their career, their motivations for turning up to work in the morning, you know, all of those kind of things. And I think, you know, the more we concentrate on those types of aspects and actually make this a, how can I put it, a journey of excitement rather than one of doom and gloom, then the sooner we'll start to turn this around. But often or not, you see many instances of, you know, project teams that are set up, and you go, well, how are you going to manage this aspect of, you know, understanding, you know, what the behaviours and the cultures of the organisation are, you know, how are you going to motivate people to do what needs to be done? And they go, oh, we've got one guy over there in the corner somewhere, but we've got 120 people over here, all focusing on, you know, programming and you know, all the other aspects, the technical aspects. And it's interesting how that just continues to happen. And, you know, I know from personal experience, having run several big digital implementation programs, you can get it right, but the leadership and the direction that you set in an organization is so important in terms of getting people to understand that this is an important factor to getting the success, that again, I place some of the responsibility at the door of the leadership in terms of saying you need to understand what motivates your people to want to change and do something different to what they were doing yesterday. Because simply just presenting them with a fait accompli and saying, log on here, off you go, is not the way to do it.
You mentioned motivation and excitement there, Dave.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to know, Dave and Roger, you know, is there much motivation, or what's the level of motivation and excitement in your own workplaces around change and transformation? How do you manage that process?
Yeah, I'll tell you what motivates me, quite frankly, is I think one of the biggest problems in business nowadays is opinion masquerading as fact. And the data, I think, comes together, and if the data is good, it can drive a direction. There's even millions of sayings around. Everybody's heard, you know, in God we trust, all others bring data. You know, figures don't lie, but liars figure. Whatever those sayings are. But the data is really important, and the data can really solve a lot of issues. Because a lot of people are not, you know, they're not comfortable saying, I don't know. So they come up with some sort of, hey, this is the way it works, this is why it's this way. And I don't think they have, you know, it's not with malice or forethought. It's just that, you know, they don't really know the answer, and a lot of times people aren't willing to admit that. So the data, I think, is, you know, very, very important to bring that in and set a direction for a company, quite frankly. And I think what's going on now is, for instance, even in the supply chain world, you know, in the procurement space, back to the behavioral science, there's a lot of negotiation bots that are even taking place right now. Mm-hmm. So there are companies with the long tail spend, you know, of your long tail that you usually don't spend a lot of time on. There's actually bots that are actually negotiating, but they're doing it in a human behavioral way. So they're actually repeating back to the, you know, individual they're working with to show them that they've heard what they've said, you know, and things of that nature. There's predictive procurement orchestration out there where there's techniques where they're giving feedback to suppliers on where they stand in the ranking process. And it's sort of that FOMO, fear of missing out, so they come back with a lower price and things of that nature. So there's a lot of integration of those things out there. But to me, when you talk about motivation, the motivation is around the data. if you can get good data and the data can come in, you can actually get your, what I call speed to margin much quicker. Not just speed to market, but, working and getting that cost of delay down and getting to that margin quicker.
And Roger?
I think I would say that data is important, but we kind of lurch around a little bit. On one hand, we're terribly focused on data, and that's the only source of good judgment. And then we'll flip the other way and we'll say, no, data's terrible. We don't want to rely on our data because we know our data's poor. And I think the balance has to be somewhere in the middle, because a lot of the things that happen in life are not things that computers necessarily accurately predict. And certainly in the business I work in, things happen very quickly and they are unpredicted. So you do need to have a degree of nous, experience, sense of what's going on, as well as the data to augment or back up or help in your decision-making process. And I think that's one of the areas we need to make sure with our young people coming through the organisation is we don't compel them to a life of relying on data too heavily, because they'll miss the opportunity to think a bit outside the box, consider the impossibilities, which sometimes become possible, and that can be very impactful negatively on an organisation. So I think digitisation of supply chains is great, but I think, as David, you probably said in the middle earlier on, we still need to have people thinking about it, not disowning that data, but making sure that they're still thinking about it and how it can apply and whether it's telling them the right things.
Thank you. Well, that almost brings us to the end of our session, but we do have time to maybe take one or two questions from the floor. Does anybody have anything they'd like to ask any of our panelists? No? Well, let me have a look, see what we've got online. We have a couple of questions coming in here. One of them is, how do organisations avoid data overload? I think we've already covered that. Here's another one. To what degree can digitalisation help prevent future supply chain disruptions? I'll just throw that to the floor.
Modelling.
Yeah?
Scenario.
Digital twins?
Modelling options, modelling implications, modelling consequences. Yeah. I think we're getting better at it, but there's no end of stuff that we need to do. But again, it takes people you need the human element to say, well, what would happen if a volcano went off in Iceland? What would be the implications to the supply chain of that? What would be the implications to the supply chain from China if there was a pandemic occurred? Computers aren't going to work that out for you. You still need to inject those things yourself.
But I think it comes to that sense and judgment making, though, isn't it? Really, and it's that it's that interaction again between the data that you've got and then the human judgment. We still have to remember that the human brain processes against the fastest computer that we've got on the planet 40 times faster. So, and if you think about the possibility then of using critical thinking skills as applied to scenario planning, you start to then begin to sort of break the boundaries of, historically we've seen this, but actually going forward, there are things that we need to say, well, yeah, that is a possibility and we shouldn't rule it out. And I think the fact that, we might say, well, how many active volcanoes have we got on the planet, just to sort of extend on your story, where are they located, what could happen? That's a realistic scenario that you could then say, right, I can model that, I can understand it. So what are my options if that does happen? And so I think this sort of more unconstrained thinking, which you won't get out of AI or machine learning or anything else like that, because that's the human sense and judgment making piece. But we can learn from that, and we can use digital twins and we can use other things to actually help us model that. And I think that's where then the extension of the tools that we've got and the refinement of them can start to take place. But I think we are very much in the sort of in new territory. And back to the point that Dave made is sometimes just stick our hands up and say, you know what, I don't know about that. Let me go away and figure it out. And I think that's perfectly acceptable. But most people struggle with that.
Yeah.
Almost I'll stick my hand up and say I don't know actually, because it's difficult to do.
And Dave, very briefly, because we're almost out of time now, but have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, not in particular. I mean, I think as we spoke about, I think we're on the horizon of some really big things that actually are happening now. And I just think we have to be cautious. And I think the big message I think everybody's hearing from this panel is don't lose touch with that human interaction, that human touch. That really needs to be factored in everything, and making sure even the data makes sense as well.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, very much. Dave, David, Roger, it's been a pleasure having you here. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.